The Bottomless Well. Master Gensho lived atop a hill forgotten by time. He didn't teach in temples or deliver sermons. He simply tended his small garden, shared tea with anyone who climbed up to visit, and every now and then, he would go down to the village to observe quietly. One morning, a young man named Taku arrived, his face full of anxiety and eyes heavy with questions he didn't know how to ask. He sat down before the master without greeting him, as if his urgency spoke for him. "I feel like I'm falling, master," he finally said. "Every thought drags me down. Every emotion swallows me whole. It's as if there's a bottomless well inside me." Gensho didn't answer. He simply stood up and, without a word, began walking toward the forest. Taku followed. They crossed paths covered with dry leaves and ancient trunks until they reached a clearing where an old stone well stood. It had no rope, no bucket, no visible water, only darkness. "Look inside," the master said. Taku leaned over. He saw nothing, just a deep, still, infinite blackness. "What do you see?" Gensho asked. "Nothing, no bottom. That is your inner self when you look at it with fear," the master said. Taku looked at him, confused, but said nothing. That bottomless well looked far too much like his own emptiness. Gensho sat down by the well's edge and sighed. Many believe the problem is the well, but true suffering begins when you start fighting the fall. Taku swallowed hard. For the first time in a long while, he didn't want to run from his abyss. "And what if I stop fighting?" Taku asked, his voice barely a whisper. Gensho picked up a small stone from the ground and tossed it into the well. There was no sound, no sign it had hit the bottom. "Then you'll discover you're not falling. You're just suspended," the master replied. "But to see that, you first have to stop moving." Taku closed his eyes. Inside, everything was chaos. His thoughts screamed, "Do something. Get out of here. Don't stop." But for the first time in his life, he didn't obey. He stayed seated by the well, breathing, not trying to understand, not trying to escape, just feeling the cool air on his skin and the weight of his body touching the earth. Minutes drifted by like leaves on the wind. Gensho sat beside him, silent, as if the world didn't need words to be whole. "How long do I have to stay here?" the young man finally asked. "Until you no longer care whether there's a bottom or not," the master answered. "When the depth no longer frightens you, you'll know its true name." "And what is that?" Gensho smiled but said nothing. Taku understood it wasn't time to know yet. Perhaps silence teaches too. The afternoon slowly began to fall, tinting the treetops amber. The sounds of the forest grew deeper, as if everything was folding inward toward its center. Taku remained there, seated beside the well. He wasn't meditating. He wasn't thinking. He was simply being. And in that being, something imperceptible began to dissolve within him. The inner voices that once pushed him to run, to fill the emptiness with things, people, goals, noise, were fading away like smoke. "Master," he murmured suddenly, "I've spent my life running from the void, trying to fill it with things, people, goals, noise, but now that I stop, all that's left is this." Gensho nodded. "The well is not your enemy," he said. "It's your reflection." Taku frowned, as if an elusive truth wanted to reveal itself but couldn't quite take shape yet. "My reflection?" "Yes. All the things you never faced directly. Your fears, your sadness, your unanswered questions. They aren't at the bottom. They are the bottom." The young man fell silent. Those words felt like soft stones falling deep inside him. "So, it's not about escaping the well?" he asked, voice trembling. Gensho shook his head. "It's about inhabiting it." A breeze swept through the clearing, and for a moment, the well no longer seemed like a punishment, but an ancient, deep dwelling worthy of being inhabited. Night fell without ceremony. wrapping the forest in a dense, soft shadow. Gensho lit a small oil lamp. Its flame barely broke the darkness, but it was enough to keep the feeling of being lost at bay. Taku was still there by the well, calmer than before. The fear lingered, but its claws were gone. "Master," he finally said, "if the well is me, how do I avoid sinking into myself?" Gensho handed him the lamp. "Take it," he said, "and look at it closely." Taku held it in his hands, feeling its warmth. The flame danced slowly, as if it were breathing. "That flame isn't big. It doesn't fill the darkness," the master continued, "but it does something more valuable. It lets you see the darkness without fear." The young man understood. It wasn't about dispelling the darkness, but learning to be in it with a small, faithful light. "That light is your awareness," Gensho added. "As long as it's alive, no matter how deep the well is, you will never be lost." Taku closed his eyes and held the lamp to his chest. He felt something inside him opening, not like a wound, but like a crack through which the sky could enter. And for the first time in a long time, the abyss felt kind. The wind blew through the trees, but Taku didn't feel cold. Something inside him had been lit, and it wasn't the lamp. It was a different kind of calm, born from no longer needing to run. "Master," he said slowly, "what if the well never fills? What if my whole life is nothing but this emptiness?" Gensho smiled gently. "Who said it has to be filled?" Taku looked at him, puzzled. "Aren't I supposed to heal it, complete it, understand it?" "You've mistaken the well for a wound," the master replied. "But not all emptiness is lack. Some emptiness is space. It's openness. It's freedom." The young man fell silent. The master's words nudged him toward a new understanding, as if language was just a slightly open door to something vaster. "The bottomless well isn't a punishment," Gensho said, gazing at the stars. "It's your infinite capacity to feel, to love, to lose yourself, to seek, to be." "But it hurts," Taku whispered. "Only when you resist. Emptiness hurts when you see it as the enemy. But if you surrender, if you stop fighting, it becomes a cradle." An owl silently crossed the sky, and in Taku's heart, for the first time, silence wasn't a threat. It was rest. Hours passed without anyone keeping track. The night ripened over the forest clearing, and the young man remained by the well, motionless, as if something sacred was unfolding within him. Suddenly, he broke the silence. "Master, before, I wanted to escape the emptiness, and now, I don't want to leave it." Gensho nodded with his eyes closed. "That's how the true path begins. You don't run. You don't chase. You simply inhabit what is. But if I stay here, won't I become passive? Won't I stop living?" The master opened his eyes and fixed his gaze on him. "And who told you that silence isn't life? Or that stillness means absence?" Taku felt those words break an old belief that had always accompanied him. That he had to do, achieve, move forward, or disappear. "True action," Gensho continued, "doesn't arise from fear or haste, but from fertile emptiness. When you stop trying to fill the well, you discover that it begins to give you. Give me what? Clarity, wisdom, peace, and above all, the ability to need less." Taku lowered his gaze. He realized how many times he had lived by reaction, not by understanding. He had spoken to fill the silence, run to avoid fear, loved to not feel alone. The well, on the other hand, asked for nothing. It only offered him presence. Dawn began to break softly, like a sigh still hesitant to fully shatter the night. The first rays of light brushed the edge of the well, and then Taku saw something he hadn't noticed before. His reflection. Not the reflection of his face, but a deeper image, shapeless and timeless. A stillness that belonged to him. "Now you understand," said Gensho. standing beside him. The bottomless well isn't darkness. It's a mirror. You just needed light to see it. And that light, where does it come from? Taku asked. From you. The young man remained silent, and this time it wasn't an uncomfortable or tense silence. It was a full silence, as if a sacred space had opened within him. You feared your own depth your whole life, the master added. But what you thought was an abyss is your true nature. So what do I do with all this now? Don't do. Live. Gensho began to walk away, letting his footsteps echo softly on the dry leaves of the forest. Taku didn't follow. He stayed by the well, not because he needed more answers, but because he was no longer afraid to be alone. He understood that there was nothing to fill, nothing to escape, just a present waiting with infinite patience to be inhabited. And for the first time, looking inside himself, he didn't fall, he floated. Days later, Taku returned to the village. The same path, the same stones, the same faces, but he was no longer the same. Others noticed, though they couldn't quite explain it. He walked slower, but with purpose. He listened more, spoke less, and when someone overflowed with complaints or worries, he didn't try to fix them. He simply stayed present, like a well, like a mirror. Where have you been? Some asked. What have you learned? He smiled without hurry, as if the answer couldn't be put into words. One afternoon, a little girl saw him sitting under a tree and came over. They say there's a very deep well inside you, she said. Aren't you afraid? Taku looked at her kindly. No, little one, not anymore, because I learned there's no bottom you can't come back from when you stop fighting yourself. The girl tilted her head, not fully understanding, but her eyes shone with the same light Taku had seen that night by the well. He closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and he knew. The well was still there, inside him, silent, infinite, inhabited, and in its depths, there was no darkness, no emptiness, no loss, only an open space where anything could be, where silence sang, where he, finally, had learned to stay.